Ukraine and Russia are ramping up military pressure ahead of the US-backed peace negotiations scheduled for Tuesday in Geneva. Kyiv says it carried out a large-scale drone strike on energy infrastructure in western Russia. 5 municipalities in Russia's Bryansk region were left without power and heating in attacks that lasted more than 12 hours. The governor says the strikes were the heaviest since the start of the war. More than 170 drones were shot down. And in eastern Ukraine, Russia's army chief says his forces are gaining ground and have seized control of several villages this month. He spoke while visiting troops.
The tasks of the special military operation continue to be carried out. The offensive is underway in all directions. This month, despite severe winter conditions, combined forces and military units of the Joint Task Force liberated 12 settlements. More than 200 square kilometres of territory have come under our control.
Well, Tuesday's Geneva peace talks are not the first time the countries have met in an effort to end the war. The two most recent rounds of face-to-face talks were in Abu Dhabi in January and early February, led by US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. They focused on military issues, including a possible buffer zone and ceasefire monitoring. Elisabeth Braw is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. She joins us from London to talk about this in more detail. Good to see you, Elizabeth. So we've moved, haven't we, from military intelligence talks in Abu Dhabi to what look like high-level political curtain-raiser talks in Geneva. I mean, does the presence of political figures such as the Deputy Russian Foreign Minister mean that we are finally moving past a simple ceasefire towards a permanent deal?
Well, the first thing to remember is that it's not over until the Fat Lady sings. So until the issue of the territory that the Russians want to get from these negotiations and the Ukrainians rightly want to keep as theirs, until that issue is resolved, the talks will essentially have been meaningless, even though a multitude of other issues have already been solved or resolved. So, but that's what it keeps coming back to every single time. What about these territories that Russia hasn't conquered yet or hasn't seized yet, but wants to get through these negotiations? I think what speaks in favor of a result this time is that President Trump is becoming quite impatient.
There's also a question about the legitimacy of Zelenskyy's leadership being raised by the Russians. They say they want him to step aside, that they want some sort of UN body to administer the nation into elections. I mean, surely that isn't going to go down very well with President Zelenskyy, is it?
No, it's not. And we should also remember another factor going into being inserted into these talks, which is that the US, the Trump administration wants Ukraine to hold a referendum and elections in May or June. And one wonders how that would work in a what is a war zone. But it really, every single time it comes down to these territories, then what comes after a ceasefire may have been concluded, which would obviously be the first step. That a ceasefire would require some sort of armed presence. And yes, as you say, the question is who would guarantee that ceasefire, and then eventually the peace that we all hope will come out of this, a just peace. But who would put forces on the ground that would secure that peace, and would those forces be respected by both sides, not just one side?
Well, on the point of whether or not those forces will be respected or not, Britain and France have both signalled a declaration of intent, as it's called, to deploy troops for monitoring after a deal. Is this a realistic deterrent?
Well, it is, I think, a very positive and courageous step by the UK and France. Somebody has to put forces in, somebody whose forces would be a credible starting point. It can't just be the UK and France, but somebody with a credible military power has to start, and they have made that commitment. But then who else will it be? And it's both a matter of deterring potential Russian aggression, but also of those forces being respected on a daily basis if they are there to protect the peace. But it's like that in every war zone where the conflict eventually ends. Somebody has to protect the peace, and if one side is not willing to really honor the peace, then it doesn't become a peacekeeping force or peace protection force. It becomes a deterrence force, which is quite different. So this is where we are at the moment, and we can just hope that other countries will back up the UK and France, so it becomes both a credible peacekeeping force and a deterrent force. But then Russia also has to make the commitment to honor the peace and not say, as it often does, well, we wouldn't respect that country, we wouldn't respect that country, or we wouldn't want that or that country or that country to guard the peace or protect the peace in Ukraine.
We seem to be quite a way off there being any peace to keep at the moment, aren't we, Elisabeth? Because in the last 48 hours, we've seen Russia claim a dozen villages in Donetsk while advancing towards Slavyansk. Ukraine's carried out deep strikes on Russian oil terminals in Taman. There's certainly no sign of any lull in the fighting before this summit. Are both sides trying to adjust the line of control before anything's agreed in Geneva?
Well, that has been Russia's strategy all along. Ordinarily, you would have peace talks during a ceasefire. So first you would agree a ceasefire, then during that ceasefire you would negotiate a lasting peace. But in this war, we have peace. I shouldn't smile or laugh, because it is a really serious and tragic situation that the peace talks are taking place even as the conflict is raging. And Russia has quite cynically used the peace talks or extended the peace talks while by putting up various reservations and various blocks of various proposals, so that it could keep fighting while the peace talks are being continued, are being carried out. Understood. So that it could, as you said, make territorial gains even while the peace talks are being conducted.
Elisabeth.
That's why...
Elisabeth Braw, many thanks. Sorry to interrupt you there at the end, but many thanks for your contribution. It's been incredibly helpful as we understand and unpick the significance of what we are about to see by way of diplomatic talks in Geneva. Elisabeth Braw of the Atlantic Council, thank you.
Don't miss out. Get a full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.